James is a person that clearly has a weak stomach, and it's not so funny the second time, is it? It wasn't funny the first time. He's thrown up in many, many cars, and he's no doubt going to tell us about how easy or hard they are to clean. Renault 10s, I think, would be easier, lots of vinyl. He then went on to do various things, including flying some aeroplanes. He's written a terribly interesting book. He's written 5. In fact, Jenny, can you hand me the other one there? Yes, well, Jenny thought it was sleeping with the pilots and cabin crew, but it's sleeping for pilots and cabin crew. I definitely recommend this book.
No sleeping.
No, there's no sleeping with or for, no sleeping for the pilot. And this one here, absolutely fantastic, and it is topical, and I thoroughly recommend that you purchase a copy tonight and read it. It is riveting. It really is a page turner, it really is. So would you please give an HRA welcome to James Nixon.
Thank you. This will be short and sweet because we took a long time with the meeting, so I know there's a lot of people who want to go home to bed. Just in keeping with the ecclesiastical theory, we finished the meeting with the navigator's prayer. Did you hear about God decided he wanted to go on holidays, so he said to St. Peter, listen, you're going to look after the place while I'm going to take a bit of a holiday. And St. Peter said, you're going back down to earth again? He says, no way. I was down there for 3 days, 2,000 years ago, got a Jewish girl pregnant, and they haven't stopped talking about it ever since. I was asked to tell you about my rallying exploits, and of course I'm a rally wanker, and all I've done is throw up in rally cars and many other types of cars. And because my sister's here to tell the truth, I'm actually not going to inspire lots about that. Alan asked if I could tell stories about my sister, and because my sister's here tonight, I can't tell you about that. But next meeting we'll finish up with that. A fast meeting's a good meeting, as fast speech is an even better speech. I got involved in rallying at a very young age, at about 15 years of age, I think it was, Roe. I think the Otway 74 was my first ever rally. Talking about rallies, I ended up starting Rally Promotions in 1978, ran it for 8 years, did all sorts of media and promotions and helped run media centres. In fact, the Rich River, I remember doing the media for the Rich River in probably 1980, and that was my first foray into radio, standing in a telephone box in the middle of nowhere on 2QN Deniliquin doing a voice report about -5 degrees at about 1 o'clock in the morning. So that's where it started. I heard my own voice back on the radio and said, I like this, it sounds fantastic, I'm really good at this, I want to be an airline pilot. Because they actually pay you to talk onto the radio. It's the best audience, the largest audience you'll ever get. It's fantastic. And they have to answer back. It's really good. By law, they have to answer back and be polite to you. It's really good fun. So at 1985, I took up rallying. I gave up involvement in rallying and took up flying. Fell in love with it. Decided to become an airline pilot, sold 2 businesses, closed down 1, sold my house. 23 months later, became an airline pilot and did that for 31 years until year before last, 2016. After losing my job with Ansett, became an Ansett refugee and went overseas and lived in Malta, worked in Malta and England, Vietnam, Bahrain, and then the last 10 years, or more than 10 years, at Emirates. And I finished my career as an A380 captain. I got on the A380 when we had 2 of them. When I left, we had 93 of them. They've now got 103. Another one's coming this week, and they've got 162 on order. It's a dud aeroplane, doesn't work. If you speak to anyone from Boeing, oh no, that A380 is no good. Trust me, passengers love it. Who's flown the A380? Everyone? Does anyone not like the A380? Fantastic. The reason I like it, it goes really, really fast. It's hard to translate what it's like to fly one of these planes, to go down 4 kilometres of runway in 20 seconds and take off in the air. The rotation speed's about 170 knots. That's about 340 kilometres an hour, and then it starts getting faster, and you really do feel the speed when you're sitting in the driver's seat. Tonight we're going to talk about MH370, a very quick summation to tell you what Roe asked me to tell the world, After I retired, we went to a dinner party, and it's quite funny because one of our close friends, his wife is occupational therapist, psychologist, and we're having this nice dinner party, and she suddenly said, you know, the captain killed everybody. And I sort of thought this was a bit funny because in the industry, most of us have a pretty good idea of what happened to MH370, and so we sort of haven't really got involved in all these conspiracy theories, because when you're talking to people who you work with, everyone thinks the same sort of thing. So I said, well, how do you know that? Oh no, pilot killed everybody. So we drank a bit that night. I think I was the designated driver, but the doctor decided that on the way home that I should write a letter for The Age. And I should tell The Age newspaper, you know, that really we don't think that the pilot killed everybody, that it was probably something else. And I said, like, you know, I'll put it on my website 2 weeks after the plane went missing. And she said, well, no one reads your website. And I said, no one reads The Age. I do. So I decided to write an article about it for The Age, and I gave it to her. I was staying at Rose Place when I first retired. I gave it to her to read, and she said, well, what does this mean? And I said, well, it's not really for you. It's for, like, you know, pilots. And she said, well, make it so we can understand it. And there it is, a book. It takes a book to try and translate this pilot crap into words that people can understand. So let me just tell you roughly what happened, and from a pilot's perspective in words that you can understand. The first officer was transitioning from the A330 to the 777. This takes about 6 weeks of simulators. It's about a 6-month process to go from one aeroplane type to another, and he had just finished was finishing his training. So this guy, the right-hand seat, was very, very competent, extremely competent, and had been exposed in the simulator sessions to all sorts of emergencies that could happen in a Boeing 777. The captain was a highly regarded TRE, that's a type rating examiner. TRIs, type rating instructors, and type rating examiners, and he was one of the best in Malaysian Airlines, and everybody loves him, and he's highly qualified, highly revered. The training process is run by the training department. When you finish your training, you get signed off by the training department. They're happy with you, and they send you to fleet department. Fleet department is where the day-to-day operations of the airline occur, with all the planes lined up and all the pilots, and they just go to work and do normal operations. So when you come from training into fleet want to make sure that they're going to get the maximum amount of time out of you, 6 months, because you get a license renewal every 6 months. So they do another check on you after training's handed you over to them. They do a whole series of checks on you, and then you're cleared to fly the flight line. You may have heard someone's flying the line. You've heard it from World War II stories, and it's in the Discovery Channel, where they line the planes up, and any pilot can run out there looking like Tom Cruise. They've got special sunglasses, and they put oxygen masks on and crash helmets, and they go out and they get in these planes, and they're all lined up on the flight line. Well, the flight line only existed for about 3 days because the Germans realised that all the planes are lined up on one line. You could fly along and you could blow them all up together. So that's why the flight line doesn't exist and never has existed after about the second time it happened in the history, during the Second World War. But when you are cleared to fly the line, it means you can go out and fly with anyone. So this last flight for the first officer to go to Beijing and back with the training captain, signing him off during this exam, is the culmination of all his training experience. So this is a very serious flight. The captain knows that the first officer is highly qualified, and he's probably at the peak that he will ever be as a 777 pilot, having done all his emergency training, and all the focus for the last 6 months has been on filling him up with information that he's now going to retain for as long as he's a pilot on the line. So they took off. The first officer was flying out to Beijing and the captain was flying back, and they got to the border between Malaysia and Vietnam, and they were being handed over, and you've probably heard about this. They said they handed them over early, and if you've read the reports, people say, oh, well, they handed them over a little bit too early. Why did they do that? Because VHF propagation, the air traffic controller would know that he was going to run out of audio soon, so best to say goodbye to him while he was still able to hear. If someone else interrupted the air traffic controller and he had to speak to someone else, a few minutes later, he comes back to them, those guys have already gone. Then he's got to get Vietnam or someone else to call them and do the handover officially. So he's done the handover maybe 5 minutes ahead of schedule. The captain said goodnight, and nothing more was heard of the aircraft. Now, what we believe has happened is that they've flown the airplane like every other 777 crew in an emergency situation, and they've performed exactly as we expect them to do. The only problem is something has stopped the radio calls leaving the aircraft, or the ACARS message leaving the aircraft. So maybe a fire at a wiring loom in the main equipment centre. There's a rack with all this stuff on it, and maybe the loom has been destroyed, it's taken out everything. But what the guys have done are a classic case, and it happens every day. They have had a smoke, fire, fumes event, and a smoke, fire, fumes event means that you want to get on the ground very quickly. The world record for staying alive with a fully enveloped fire in an aircraft is 22 to 23 minutes. And all pilots react the same way in the simulators, and we all practice this in the simulator. You decide you want to get back in a hurry. In this case, they've gone straight to Penang. Penang's the airport where this captain grew up, where both of these guys have flown thousands of times on 737s from KL to Penang, and he's turned exactly to that direction. The good news that came out of the final report last week has vindicated this for us. The captain has disconnected the autopilot to do this turn, and he's turned a tighter turn than the airplane can do on autopilot, which is exactly what pilots do. When they want to land in a hurry, in this situation, you hand over the checklist and for the smoke, fire, fumes checklist to the first officer, and the captain says, I'll do the radios, I'll fly the airplane, put the fire out, and they disconnect the autopilot and they turn, and then they descend. This plane's turned, it hasn't descended. You've probably heard people talk about hypoxia, a lack of oxygen. That's one of our party tricks. We really love it. We get tested all the time. In that case, we descend, then turn. And so you can look at any radar trace of any emergency that's happening in the world, and you can tell whether the guys had a depressurisation or whether they had a smoke, fire, fumes event. And it just stares us in the face, and we could tell this. But of course, the media and the people who could legally talk about it are people who aren't in the industry. Because when you are in this industry, you sign a confidentiality agreement and you cannot speak in the media for air traffic controllers, air crash investigators and pilots. So we all sort of got the same idea that this is a smoke, fire, fumes event. And so these guys have turned, something's happened, they've been overwhelmed and they haven't descended. The plane's just gone off by itself with no autopilot. Now, those of us who've flown large, wide-body airplane, we know that these airplanes love flying by themselves with no autopilot on. They have not only static stability, which lifts the wing up after they've done a turn, they've got this new dynamic stability for these new fly-by-wire controls, and they spend the next 10 minutes damping out any oscillations. So it's quite possible that these planes just fly forever without anyone touching them. Case in point, a friend of mine took off out of Heathrow in an A380, flying back to Dubai. They lost the autopilot, they lost the auto thrust on departure out of England, and the weather was crappy, so they thought, oh, well, we'll just keep hand flying down till we get down to maybe Munich and get it fixed. And air traffic control said, well, okay, if you're happy to keep flying, we'll give you the airspace, because there's a few airspace limitations that you need when you're not flying with an autopilot. And he said, okay, we'll fly for a few hours and we'll feel better and we'll let you know. And that'll give Emirates time to get another airplane to come and pick up our passengers from Dubai. And they ended up flying all the way back to Dubai from London with no autopilot at altitude. And I said, what was it like? And he said, oh, it was simple. You just leave the airplane and it just stayed there. And every 10, 20 minutes, ATC will give you another direct to, and you just turn 5 degrees and let it go, and it would just keep on going. So we know that these airplanes can fly for a very, very long time without an autopilot. So we think what's happened is this airplane's been turned back towards Penang and the pilots have been disabled and they've died, and the plane's kept on flying all by itself. Eventually it starts doing some turns, and maybe a wing has entered a cloud. Clouds for us are big, steamy, bubbly things that lift the wings up and bounce the wings around. And as you know, if you've been in a plane and you had some bumps as you go through clouds, if you put one wing in a cloud, which is, we do this when we're having some fun, fly around and you put one side of the airplane in the cloud and it'll be bumpy and the plane will start turning and moving. So we're assuming that this plane has just wandered off all by itself, being sent all over the sky. There's no proof that it did any major turns at any one time, except the one over Penang. And that was only a 5 degrees turn, a very slow bank turn, so it wasn't a radical turn. And the turn south into the Southern Ocean, that's never been captured by radar, so we actually don't know if that was 25 turns or 30 turns or one big turn. So the plane's lost and it's gone on flying by itself. Eventually, the right-hand engine has run out of fuel. We know this because the right engine was using more fuel than the left one. And that's flown along, the autopilot's off, one engine's gone, and normally you'd expect this airplane to get out of shape and start crashing. But it just so happens the 777 has a thing called TAC, which is a special thrust augmentation control system. And it's used when when you take off and have an engine failure, and the rudder actually is controlled and makes the airplane fly straight. So after this plane's lost one engine, it's flying straight, and eventually 15 minutes later the second engine's died, and then the plane's gone straight in. So in my book I look at a few things as to how we can compare. What do you look at for data to find out what possibly happened to this aircraft? The smoke fire fumes things happen every day. It's an electrical smoke smell. Something's wrong with the IFE system, the TV system. Something's wrong with the circuit breaker, it pops and you smell a bit of smoke. It's electrical, and everybody here who's ever been in a rally car knows what electrical smoke smells like. But there's another type of smoke which is called air conditioning smoke, which is the air conditioning system where we get the air from the front of the engines and we compress it and we put it through air conditioning pack, and then we pump that into the airplane. We pump more air in than we let out, and that pressurises the aircraft. And sometimes one of the liners goes or something goes crazy and one of these packs starts producing tons and tons of smelly black smoke. The fix for that is to identify which one it is and turn it off. So electrical smoke and air conditioning smoke we're really good at putting out. We do it every day. How often do we do it? Once every 2,000 flights. How many flights are there a day? 106,000. We do this 51 times a day, smoke, fire, fumes events. What's different about this one? This one, everybody died, and they died very fast. And we haven't killed people in aeroplanes from smoke since 1980 in Riyadh and 1985 in Manchester. And they died so fast, and on television, in the case of Manchester, that we decided to change the industry, and we fire block everything. We fire block carpets, we fire block seats, we fire block the walls. You actually can't set fire to an aeroplane if you try it with a cigarette lighter because of all the chemicals in the furnishings. But something has made these people die very, very quickly. Toxic smoke and fumes. It's exactly what happens if I set fire to this room, or your house, or your sound system, or your television. The oxygen gets taken out, the cyanide starts, and you die in 3 breaths. Usually with a smile on your face, because it's quite euphoric. Well, that's what they think, that's from the look of their faces. And to survey that, I looked at the one known place, unlike air crashes, where we have information on people who die from smoke, fire, fumes events, and that is nightclub fires. Since 1922, we've started having nightclub fires in the world, normally one every 10 years. But more recently, in the third world, as the third world gets money, we're now having nightclub fires pretty much every year, especially in the third world countries. But we had a great one in 2003 in Long Island. We killed 100 kids in 6 minutes. Actually, they probably died in 5, but 6 minutes was over completely. And 88 people of those who died within 6 minutes, there was nothing wrong with them. They weren't trampled, they weren't burnt, nothing was wrong with their bodies, they just breathed in and died. And that's in a room a bit bigger than this. So what happens if it happens in an aeroplane? It's unbelievable how much smoke can come out of a lithium battery that's on fire. If you want to have a quiet, no, don't do this at night time because you probably won't sleep. Tomorrow, have a look on YouTube for a guy who's got an iPhone and a hatchet, and he tapes an iPhone 6 to a hatchet and to a piece of wood, and he hits it with a hatchet, and the amount of smoke that comes out of one iPhone. It's amazing. And we're having these problems in planes now all the time because we're having people drop their phones in their business class seats, and like when someone's got a wet paint sign and you say, don't touch it because it's wet paint, the cabin crew says, don't touch anything, don't touch your seat if you've dropped your phone down in your seat. What's the first thing they do? They move their seat, and these electronic seats squash the phone, and we have an event. And we're really good at putting these out now. We're really good at it. We have special procedures now for lithium battery fires in cabins, but we aren't very good at it in the cargo compartment. And UPS 6 was a 747 that in 2010 took off from Dubai, and in about 20 minutes had one of these horrible fires where the pilot did exactly that. Turned the autopilot off, tried to come back to where he took off from. He could have landed just there in Doha or straight ahead there in Bahrain. Instead, he tried to go back where he came from, to Dubai, and they all died. Every pilot in the world in the next 6 months after that was put in the simulator at exactly the same location, same height, with exactly the same information, 0, and the instructor just fed in this smoke to their cockpits, which is what they use, this supposed clean smoke that we're allowed to be breathing in. Oh, it's all right, it's just vegetable. Well, it smells great. Anyway, so you're sitting in the cockpit and all of a sudden they did the same to us, and my record, I got the plane landed in Bahrain in 11 minutes. Some guys took 12 minutes and went to Doha. Nobody went back to Dubai because we've realised that you can't do it. So every time we have a crash, we learn through this iterative process of finding out what happened and fixing it. So in our situation here with MH370, we reckon that we've got smoke fire fumes events, and we're hoping that the industry will address it. The industry hasn't done anything about addressing it. They're just trying to pretend that the pilot stole the airplane and somehow killed everybody. But that's what we think. We think it's a toxic smoke and fumes event, and everybody was dead in a very short time. I'm not going to go on for another 25 minutes because I can see people are starting to fall asleep, especially my young first officers up the back. Oh no, sorry, actually they're children. Oh, I thought they were some of my first officers who come over to meet me from Dubai. Lovely to see you. But what I will say is would like questions answered, and I can take any questions for you now. Got one.
The tracking of the plane, why, I would imagine Pine Gap would know where everything was. Why haven't they said anything?
The tracking of the plane, and particularly the American base at Pine Gap, why didn't they pick any of this up? The problem is that they're only looking for high-speed aircraft. They're not looking for something to do 470 knots because there are thousands and thousands flying at any time. And even in the final report, the Malaysian military pointed out, and they said, we saw it, all right, but we didn't bother looking at it because it was not a high-speed aircraft. It was just a friendly aircraft doing 470 knots. And when you consider, we all do about 470 to 480 knots. You know, it didn't look out of place. Pine Gap only really looks for incursions from high-speed bombers and jet aircraft.
I saw a thing on telly where some guy from Rolls-Royce said that, you know, the Americans, when they fire a gun, they don't fire it into the air. They fire it into the ground. And the Americans, when they fire a gun, they fire it into the air.
every Rolls-Royce engine is talking to the Rolls-Royce factory all the time.
The question is, engine monitoring from Rolls-Royce? Yes, that does happen, and we pay for it. Every airline or every engine owner, and I don't know if you understand this about the industry, the engines are leased, and so are the airframes. So if people like Emirates, they don't actually own the airplane, they buy the airplane, gets there, then they sell it off to someone like the HRA might decide to buy themselves a $40 million engine, and they'll lease that back to the airline, paid for by the hour. And so you pay extra, you get a monitoring package, and Rolls-Royce will look at it. And basically, Rolls-Royce turns this on and off. If an aeroplane's causing trouble, like an engine's causing trouble, using too much oil, for example, they'll monitor it closely. Otherwise, they only monitor it once or twice a day. But they don't have Find My Engine. In this book, I've made a whole heap of recommendations, and I'm saying, well, why don't we just put an iPhone and strap it to the size of each engine and have Find My Phone? You know, it's that easy, and yes, we can do that now. So they didn't do it at the time, but the ACARS system, which was reporting, was part of that system. Next question.
Do you think they'll ever find anything?
Do we think they'll ever find anything? They found 26 parts of this aircraft in 6 countries, from all on the western side of the Indian Ocean, including Mauritius and La Réunion. 3 of these parts have serial numbers, and we know they're from MH370. Another 6 parts are 99.999% sure, but they don't have a serial number on them. And there's a lot more that can't be from anyone else. So they'll probably continue to find pieces of it. Sadly, people have been expecting to see, particularly the families who I'm in contact with, for some reason people have been telling them that this was ditched slowly in the sea. There's 3 branches of science that have come out of this, and each one's worthy of a movie. And the problem is that it's all brand new science, and it's going to get better and better and better. So the last data we have is it was going down at about 26,000 feet per minute. So we're not looking for an aeroplane. We're looking for 2 engine cores. They're looking for a core 1 metre by 1 metre by 2 metres of steel. That's a steel core of the engine. When they find those engines, they'll start looking for the black boxes nearby. That's all they're looking for. Now, I was, in my book, unfortunately the ATSB were comparing it with little light plane crashes in Australia. In my book, I looked at, let's compare it with something that's real. Swiss Air 111 was a L1011 that crashed off Halifax, Nova Scotia, and that plane was doing 250 knots, 500 kilometres an hour, and it went in from 9,700 feet. This plane went in from 35,000 feet, probably doing about 500 miles an hour, 500 knots, 1,000 kilometres an hour. So I compared it to Swiss 111, which broke into 2 million pieces. I didn't believe that. Someone says 2 million pieces, you think, yeah, righto, 150. No, 2 million. I went and read their report, and it's a really great report if you're into air crash investigations. The Canadians have done a marvellous job in this report. It was actually over 2 million pieces. 360 people sat in a hangar and washed and collated every single piece. And they got to 2 million pieces. And that plane didn't go in too hard. The Space Shuttle Challenger, when it went in, was 62 miles up. And after the rocket went over, the solid rocket booster went over the cockpit, there was a 22 G-forces hit those astronauts. 3 of them survived. And then it went up. It happened at about 40 miles. It went up another 22 miles, and then it fell down. And it landed in the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, with 250 G-forces. And when the astronauts when they found the crew compartment, it was one of the divers described it as a bunch of twisted metal with wires sticking out of it. And they got the DNA out of it and told the families, here's your family member, but there's nothing left. So there's probably not going to be much to find. Any more questions? It's a pretty maudlin way to finish it, isn't it?
I have one.
Alan's got one.
Are we using the Malaysian money to, in fact, find oil in the seabed in the Southern Ocean?
The Chinese did a great job. In fact, the Chinese actually helped map this area for us. That was one of their contributions. less than 10% of Australia's sea surface area had been mapped. I mean, this report, this book shows you, it's just disgusting, this whole report. The air traffic control, after 10 minutes of losing an aircraft, by law, are meant to declare an emergency after losing a radar-controlled aircraft, which this airplane was. The worst case scenario, if it was not radar controlled, under radar identification, you'd have to wait for an hour and a half before you declared an emergency. This august body didn't raise an emergency, declare an emergency for 5 hours and 10 minutes. And then they sent the rescue airplane to go to the last known position, which in Australian parlance, and anywhere else in the world, is 2 minutes after a plane's past its waypoint. They ask other airplanes to look, and then they send a plane along the track. They didn't send a plane for another 5 hours. And so it went missing at 20 past 1 in the morning, and the first plane took off at 11 a.m. Just unbelievable. And the sad part is you as passengers and me as a pilot were flying through KL's airspace, paying full rate overfly rights for that air traffic control safety. And the good news is the head of air traffic control has just resigned in Malaysia last week. Just amazing. It's a large cock up. Any more questions? Great.
Totally and completely unrelated to the crash. You've been talking in, the planes travelling at or flying at so many thousand feet altitude and so many knots and so forth. Why is it that the Americans and the aviation industry are the only two major bodies in the world that haven't yet gone to the metric system?
Well, we do talk in metric system, and the sad part is we talk in altitude in feet, and we talk in metres for visibility, and we talk in pounds if you're in America ordering fuel, inches of mercury in America. The rest of us use hectopascals. It's quite incredible that they've stuck with knots for speed, and for altitude it's in feet. But when you're going past a mountain, it's in metres. Go figure. It's amazing how we miss them, really, when you think of it. Because there's some pretty smart blokes flying these airplanes, I've got to tell you. If I can do it, mate, anybody can do it. Any more questions? All right, I'm very sorry to keep you up so late. Thank you very much.
James, that was enthralling. It was nearly as good as your book. That was fantastic. Thank you very, very much. We'd like to present you with this Ansett pocket gnome.
Oh.
Thank you to Amy. That's a prize possession. It's a one-off.
It is.
So congratulations on that. We'd like you to...
photo.